Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Writers Podcast. And I have with me a special guest, and that would be Bev Vincent. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Doing just fantastic, thanks. How are you?
Awesome. I'm doing great, and it's great to have you back on again. You've been a constant guest. That's sort of like a companion to a constant reader, I guess you could say. And you've been on the Stephen King podcast quite a few times for various things, and I'm very glad to have you on today to talk about your latest book, the Stephen King Complete Exploration of His Work, Life, and Influences. And that's a pretty amazing job, considering you only had 222 pages to put it in. So, Bev, I've watched a fair number of your interviews for this book with other people, and I've tried to come up with some questions that I hope you haven't been asked before.
That'd be cool.
So I'm going to start off with, what is your favorite Stephen King book? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. And for those that are interested, it's Lisey's Story, Bag of Bones, and a sentimental favorite, Salem's Lot. So we've got that out of the way, so you don't have to worry about that. But I did want to take a moment before we get into your stuff. Of course, with the release of your book, this latest book, it's Stephen King's 75th birthday. Was just happened this week. And on a sadder note, of course, was the recent passing of Peter Straub. I wonder if you could talk about him a little bit. I don't know how much you interacted with him as compared to Stephen King, but I assume that you did have some interaction with him.
Quite a lot, actually.
Oh, okay.
It started back in the 1990s when the internet really started catching fire. And there were these Usenet news groups that were dedicated to different subjects that people might be interested in. So there was alt.books.Stephen King, which was really, really active, and alt.books.Peter Straub. And Peter was very active not only on his own news group, but he came into the King one as well.
Oh,
and he was very open, very receptive. And he and I started emailing each other outside of that. And I met him for the first time in 1997 when he was in Dallas for a book signing. I got to go hang out with him at his hotel beforehand, and he took me out to dinner after. We saw each other a lot of times over the years. He was a regular at NECON, which is the Northeast Writers Conference.
Right.
A very low key thing, so he's just sort of hanging out there, having lunch with us in the cafeteria. And I've seen him at a couple of public events. There was the one with John Grisham and King and a couple of other people in New York.
Mm-hmm.
There was another one in Brooklyn where it was Peter and his daughter and Steve and Owen. So yes, I've known Peter a lot over the years, and it's really, really sad to see him go like that.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics, but he was, from my understanding, he was in ailing health the last couple of years. So I guess it eventually caught up with him. Of course, he collaborated with King on Talisman and Black House. And unfortunately, now it looks like that trilogy, so-called trilogy, is not going to be completed unless King either goes solo or collaborates with somebody else. And I don't know if he would do that.
Not sure. It's hard to say. My gut feeling is no, but I can't possibly speak to whether, I know that they had talked enough about the third book to have a pretty good idea of what it was going to involve and where it was going to go. So it's always possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bev, you've written a lot about King, and you've worked out on an anthology. There's really only one thing left for you to do with him. So I'm just throwing that out there. Just in case, Steve, if you're listening, I know Bev would never approach you directly about something like that, but there you go. Okay, so just one more thing on Peter Straub. What were some of his books that you really enjoyed? I know Ghost Story was a pretty seminal book for me growing up.
I discovered Ghost Story in sort of the similar way that I discovered King. I just was out at a convenience store one night picking up sodas or something or other, and I saw Ghost Story on a spinner by the checkout, and I picked it up, and that was my introduction to him. That was probably a year after the book was released in hardcover.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I've read him thoroughly over the years. More of a fan of his novels than of his shorter work. He tended to get really experimental sometimes with the shorter work.
Okay. All right.
But the Blue Rose books in particular, the Throat and Mystery and Coco, and then continuing on to Lost Boy, Lost Girl, and In the Night Room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the Shadowland, you want to go way back.
Right. Floating Dragon.
Julia, yeah, Floating Dragon, which was really his most kingly novel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, he did a lot of interesting things over the years, and he sort of readjusted. He went from these really, really big Byzantine Baroque novels to some equally long but more accessible, and he would have said that too, to books like Lost Boy, Lost Girl, which were slimmer. Get in, get to the story, get out.
Mm-hmm.
Just consciously just readjusted what he was doing at several times during his career.
Yeah, he's definitely a different writing style than King. He was a much more, I don't know what the right word is, literate maybe, or literary writer, or he used words in a much more, like when I read a Peter Straub story, I always knew that I was reading, whereas with King, it's much more of an immersive experience for me. I don't know if you have the same kind of feeling about that.
Yeah, and I have, there's all sorts of debate about who wrote what in the two books that they collaborated on. But I would stake my life on the fact that Peter wrote the opening section to Black House. Because that is very Straub-esque with this floating point of view. It's just, but of course, they tended to imitate each other's styles while they were doing those books. So who knows?
Yeah, yeah. I'm just going to let listeners know that Bev has a lot of background, but he's covered that for me on other podcasts. So I would just recommend that you go into my catalog of interviews and Google Beg's name. You can find that on Lou's Reviews. Now I've put everything on YouTube. So Bev's been on, like I said, almost more than somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen times. So we've gone over a lot of your background. I do want to take a moment to mention, though, that you've written a lot of companion books like The Dark Tower Companion, The Road to the Dark Tower, which was nominated for a Bram Stoker, and your Stephen King Illustrated Companion, which is, I can see on your shelf there. I've constantly referred to that book as the best bang for the buck piece of Stephen King paraphernalia that you could get, because it's got, at least the first edition had all these cool little pull-out facsimiles of some handwritten notes and whatnot, and so it's a very tactile experience, and it's got a lot of great stuff. And of course, your more recent book that you've done is an extension of that, because the first Illustrated Companion went up to what I think was the 2000s. I can't remember now.
There was a revised edition that covered up through 11/22/63 and Under the Dome. And really, that was the genesis of this book. Was I went back to the publisher and said, should we update it? Only to find out that the publisher had been bought out by the Cordo Group, and now they were more interested in something more than just an update. They wanted like a full-blown expansion.
Right. Then before this book, prior to this, you had done the anthology Flight or Fright that you edited with Stephen, and that was a lot of great short stories. And of particular note, I think the Joe Hill story was the standout for me in that collection. But yeah, a lot of great stories in there, going all the way back to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I believe.
Yeah. Have a really cool little chapbook of Joe's story that Brian Freeman did through his Levidian Publications.
Okay.
That's part of his Patreon thing. That's,
right. Nice. Is that the title? Chapter?
It's yeah. You are released. Yeah, but he's done. He sent me a copy of that. I did another one with Brian and Francois Vaillancourt. We did this thing called What's in a Name, where I did research into all of the other King books that had working titles or titles that got changed for various reasons, and then Francois provided mock-up covers for what these books might have looked like.
Oh,
so that
okay.
was a fun too.
All right. So You've as we mentioned before we started, you've done a lot of interviews for this book. You've gained a lot more traction this time. Of course, King tweeted out that the book was being released, which is obviously a big help. So it must be very gratifying for you, because I know you've been pretty diligent, and you've had adopted the same sort of work habits that King has. Like, you're up, is it at 5 every morning, writing for a couple hours before you get to work or start work?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really nice about this publication is that Quarto is an international publisher, whereas the previous Stephen King illustrated companion was Barnes and Noble exclusive. So if you were outside of the United States, it wasn't so easy to get. Whereas this book is everywhere. Yeah, I've heard from people in New Zealand who've gotten their first copies, and it's very nice to have it available to a much wider audience.
Right, and at the same time, your fiction career you've got quite a head of steam going up now. You've got, I don't know what, 16 short stories up for publication or something around that number.
2022 is about 16.
Wow.
I've got over 125, I think, that are either out or will be out between this year and into next year.
Okay.
But yeah, that's taking off quite nicely.
Yeah, awesome. And with all the success, I wonder if you've responded to one earlier criticism that you got, that you didn't know how to write male characters.
Someday I'm going to introduce myself to that person, who I can never remember who he is, but yeah. So I wrote a story that was accepted for an anthology, and it was a Canadian anthology. And at some point, the editor was asked to submit it for a second round of editorial review. And the feedback that I got back from this person, who I'm not supposed to know who he is, but they sent me the Word document that had his critique in it, and of course all of the information about the metadata is all there in the file, so I do know who this person is. Said that the biggest fault was that I didn't convincingly write like a man. That it's so difficult for a woman to write from a male perspective, and that there were things that this male character had done that no man would ever do. And the irony was that this was probably at that time the most autobiographical thing I'd ever written. And everything in it were things that I did. So yeah, I got a lot of mileage out of that one.
Yeah, to me, that's your version of King's lady in the grocery store didn't write the Shawshank Redemption story.
The sad thing about it was that the guy who originally bought the story, at that time he thought the story was fine, but once he got this criticism, he said, "Oh, but now you have to go back and rewrite it." And I just said, "No, I'm pulling the story," and I was booted from this anthology.
Yeah, that story never fails to crack me up. That's a good one. One of the things I came across that you mentioned, that you used to have a lot of King memorabilia, but you've kind of scaled back on that as you've got older, and I can relate to that. Yep. But you did mention that one of your treasured things was you had King gave you a yellow notepad with where he had handwritten this first scene where Roland met Eddie. Roland and Eddie met Stephen King. Yeah. I'm curious how long was it, and how different is it from the published version?
Okay, this isn't it, but it was on a notepad like this. It was
okay. Okay.
It was probably about 10, 12 handwritten pages. But the cover sheet was his list of things that he wanted to take with him on this trip, because he was flying out to California to visit with Frank Muller, the audiobook narrator who'd been seriously injured in a motorcycle accident. Right. And among the things he had listed were things like nightmare repellent, and so a couple of funny things like that. I've never actually sat down and compared it word for word with the final published one, but I don't think there are that many changes. But yeah, it's in his distinctive print right style that if anybody has seen like the Dreamcatcher notepads and things like that, he's got a very distinctive handwriting style. And yeah, it was just one of these things that showed up in my door one day in a FedEx envelope, and it was was blown away by it.
Well, that's pretty awesome. Um, I, I'm just a couple more items here I'd like to check off before we get into your book. And I can see again over your shoulder, you've got Fairy Tales, Stephen King's latest book.
Actually, that one showed up on my doorstep this week.
Oh, okay.
Steve sent me a signed copy, and so that was
nice.
rather
Nice.
a nice surprise.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on the book?
One of the things that it made me sort of think back over his career is how many books he's written where he takes a significant amount of time to introduce the characters before all hell breaks loose.
Mm-hmm.
And we can go back to the very beginning and Carrie to some extent, Salem's Lot definitely. And how far do we get into that book before we find out that there's something truly evil going on?
Mm-hmm.
And in Fairy Tale, we spend about 200 pages getting to know Charlie Reed, Charlie McGee Reed, which I think is sort of a little wink and a nod to his constant readers, Charlie McGee.
Mm-hmm.
We spend 200 pages getting to know him and his circumstances, how he got to be where he is, what sort of trouble he's been in the past, both in his family life and his personal life, before we go off on this grand journey with him. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit different than having Gandalf show up at the beginning of the book and say, Frodo or Bilbo, let's go.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking, when has he done it differently? And I thought, well, Cell is one certainly where everything just goes to hell in the first couple of pages. And, The Stand to a certain extent, although we do get a lot of backstory from these characters post-apocalypse, but before they all get together.
Right.
What a treat it is to have a writer who will just spend that time introducing us to characters, world build, and then sort of send us off in a different direction.
Yeah.
The funny thing is I did manage to have a little bit of information about Fairy Tale for the new book.
Sure.
And when King first talked about it, he said he wanted to write something happy. Yeah. Something that would make him happy because of the pandemic and all of that. But the vision that came to his mind as the starting sort of the thing that got him going from it was not a happy vision at all. It's this world that's turning gray and the city that's falling apart. And it's interesting how this was his vision of something that might end up being a happy story.
Yeah.
The thing that really fascinates me about it is that King has written a lot about the origin of stories. Right. Where do they come from? Do they come from the myth pool, like in Lisey's story? And in this one, he sort of posits the possibility that stories aren't really fiction. They're things that are happening in parallel worlds that people who are creative can tune into, channel into. Like maybe Ray Bradbury knew about this merry-go-round that he used in Something Wicked, and maybe Lovecraft knew about this. And then I sort of extrapolated to say, well, maybe Roland's world is real. And King has a little channel into that, and that's where he got his inspiration to write the Dark Tower stuff. It's an interesting theory, because I think that's something writers struggle with explaining is where does it all come from?
Yeah.
Make this stuff up. It's a bit of a mystery.
Yeah. He's done that sort of in a different way with Lisey's story, with the story pool. It's kind of the same idea, and it's another take on the multiverse, I guess you could say, as well. So it's interesting. We reviewed it on the podcast, the Stephen King podcast, and we noted the same thing. Like it takes you're halfway through the book before you even get into the fantastical elements of the story, really. And I could have stayed in the real world with those characters. I was totally Bowditch was, he was a prick, but he was a lovable prick. And then we also loved how all things in the real world were interlocked with what was going on in the fairy tale world, especially with Bowditch. We found out his character behaviors because he went on that merry-go-round, and it affects people differently than it does animals and all that stuff. So that was really fascinating. And he just pulled from so many threads, like you said, from other, like Ray Bradbury and Lovecraft and Jack and the Beanstalk, and you could just go on and on. Wizard of Oz. Yeah, it was just amazing. And it was done pretty seamlessly, and yet there was an element of reality to the story because the main character was, and admittedly, he's, you know, he says, I'm not your stereotypical hero. There was a edge to him, and we bought the actions that he did do in the fairy tale world because of the things he did as a kid with his childhood friend. There was that mean streak in him. So you like the character, you like them, but you know, it's not somebody that you're going to go all crazy about because he's got flaws that you know, they're a little difficult to deal with as well. So that was interesting. And most telling is like the fairy tale the princess, you know, normally you would expect the two of them to get together, but she said, I can't, you know, I appreciate what you've done, but I can't stay. I don't want you to stay because every time I look at you, I'm reminded of what I didn't do. So yeah, so it was, you know, I like those bittersweet tales, you know, like Lord of the Rings, where Frodo has to go to the Grey Havens at the end. It was the kind of that story, and I just really appreciated it on that level as well.
Yeah, and even 11/22/63, where he's got this romance of his life, but he can't stay.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's talk about your book, Stephen King: A Complete Exploration of His Work, Life, and Influences. Was that your title?
It was not. I didn't really have a title.
Oh, okay.
I assumed for a while it was going to be the Stephen King Illustrated Companion, expanded or revised. Or at one point, I think they asked me for some suggestions, and I might have said, you know, Stephen King at 75, but that would sort of cement the book in time a little bit too much, they said. So no, yeah, it wasn't my title, but it took me a while to learn it. I used to have to look it up every time I referred to it, but now I've got it down even to the Oxford comma, which is work, life, and influences. And I did appreciate that order because for me, the work comes first. You know, biography to me is interesting only in the way that it influences the work.
Right.
And so that order of work, life, influences, I think that worked for me quite well.
Right. And sorry, I can't remember. Was it you that pitched the idea for this book, or was it somebody came to you? I can't remember.
Well, the original book, the Stephen King Illustrated Companion, that was brought to me. Barnes & Noble had done this series of readers' companions. They had one on Poe and one on Jane Austen. And they outsourced these elaborate books to a group called Becker and Meyer, who had expertise in fully illustrated, lavish books. And on the strength of The Road to the Dark Tower, they came to me and asked if I would be willing to write that book. And so last year, I went back to Becker and Meyer thinking that we would update the Illustrated Companion. And that's when I found out that, you know, Quarto was now the master in charge, and they suggested that we do an expanded edition rather than just an updated edition. And so I had to produce then a fairly detailed outline of how I envisioned this much longer book. There were a lot of things I didn't get to talk about in the Illustrated Companion. There were, you know, several books in a row even that I didn't even mention that they existed, particularly in the early 90s. And so I was really happy to be able to go back and say, I'm going to talk at least a little bit, and sometimes at greater length, about everything that he's written at book length, and then, you know, do some extra things too that you know, sort of illustrate the book as well.
So between these two books, were you keeping notes so that your timeline for King was kept up to date, so that you wouldn't have, because I know you've got a lot of footnotes, so I assume that every time you reference something, you had to go look it up on the internet or something like that. That must have been a lot of work.
Not so much on the internet. I have a really extensive archive which has been digitized.
Okay.
Of pretty much every interview that I'm aware of, especially in print. The video interviews are more difficult because you can't search through those. You have to sort of watch through the whole thing. But yeah, I've got hundreds of interviews. And then there were a couple of books from the early 70s that accumulated many of his interviews from those days. So like Bare Bones and Feast of Fear. And because I've scanned them all, I can search the PDFs. So if I'm going to write about Rose Madder, I can very quickly pull up every place that's been mentioned. I mean, I did search online too, just in case there were things that, you know, sometimes even old interviews pop up now that have been gone for a long time. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because I write about King on an ongoing basis with my Cemetery Dance News from the Dead Zone thing, I've always kept files of stuff.
Okay, I was just wondering because I I'm looking at all these footnotes at the back of the book and I'm going, oh my god, like where's he keeping all this stuff or finding it? I just assumed that you were going on the internet or something. Oh, that's interesting. So the first book took it up into the 2000s, I guess, and it covered the accident, I believe. But then, and then we get into this book, which sort of picks up in the knots and the teens. So did you from space restrictions in that, did you have to do any condensing of the previously published material, or how much did you change in that?
So the first thing that I had to decide was how the book was going to be structured.
Okay.
And the previous book was structured around 10 or 12 selected works. And since this book was going to be about everything, I had sort of thought, how we're going to do it. And it seemed to me that there was a fairly natural progression by the decade. That we could talk about the works of the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the post-accident 2000s and things like that. Right. And so I went back then to fill in the decades from the past.
Okay.
To include longer discussions of all sorts of books that either weren't mentioned at all. So like I didn't even talk about Rose Madder, Gerald's Game, Dolores Claiborne. Those weren't in the previous book at all in any way. Right. So I had to go back and sort of develop the material for those. Of course, whenever you're given the opportunity, you go back and take an editing pass through. I think I might have condensed a little bit some of the work, but not very much. I didn't have a hard and fast page restriction, but I couldn't go completely wild. In large part too for time consideration. We wanted to get the book out around the time of King's birthday. And then from 2000 onward, I had really, with the updated version, I'd gotten us up to Mention of Mr. Mercedes, I think was the last one that I had updated to.
Okay.
So then I had to go back and write from scratch everything from Mercedes onwards.
Right. And for each book or that you spent some time on, did you have to how did you decide on the length for each one? Was it the impact that it had in the social media or whatnot, or is it just like, I really like this book, so I want to talk about it a bit more than this other one? How did you balance that out?
In large part, it had to do with how much material I could find about it that seemed relevant to my general thesis, which is, how does biography impact what was being written? Right. And so there are some books like Cell where, he had this vision, he was standing in a street and he saw this woman on the cell phone and he just had this vision. There wasn't really much more to it than that. And so I did not go into a lot of personal opinion about books.
Okay.
Mostly what I'm writing about is, where was King's head when he was writing it? What thing from either his immediate present or maybe even from something further in the past that developed into this book? And more than anything else, I wanted to find out what he said about it at the time, or maybe subsequently, but to find all those quotes from the interviews so that we could see at the time the book was being written or when it was published, what his thoughts were on where the book came from. And it's really fascinating to see how little snapshots like the one from Cell turned into the book. And the one that really strikes me as being the most obscure in a way is the inspiration for Billy Summers, which was this vision of a person in a basement apartment with these windows that are at street level and seeing feet going by. Now, this is something that comes into the book, sort of mid to late book, but it certainly does not talk about a guy who's a hitman. It's just, he starts with that and says, well, who is this guy? And then oh, maybe he's this, and why is he there? Well, maybe that. And for me, that's what I'm interested in more than anything else, is how these
Right.
things evolve.
Right. And I'm curious now that you've got this book out, and of course King is still writing, so there's more to be added onto these books. Do you think down the road that there will be like an updated third version?
Well, that remains to be seen.
Mhm.
I mean, the one sort of snarky comment that I've seen a couple of times about this book is, how can it be a complete exploration when he's still writing? Which is fair enough, but
Yeah.
complete up till 2022.
Right.
Maybe even with a little hint of what's coming in 2023.
Mhm.
It's always possible. I think that if there were to be anything, it would be an expanded version of this book rather than
Right.
something totally new, because this one really does cover everything
Mhm.
up to this point. I didn't really veer off too much into the adaptation world, because that's been covered by a lot of other people, and to me that's a step sort of apart from King's
Yeah.
creativity. I mean, there are certainly ones where he's been intensely involved in them,
Yeah.
things like Lisi's Story and Maximum Overdrive. But
Mhm.
to me, the adaptations stand apart from the literary world of Stephen King. So yeah, I mention them and I list them all, but
Yeah.
I don't explore them in any great length.
That's quite a task in itself, because
Yeah.
he's got like so many works that have had not just one but multiple
Yeah.
adaptations, and I still can't for the life figure out why Children of the Corn seems to be the go-to the go-to project.
I think the rights for that one must be going real cheap, and if somebody says, yeah, we can make a movie out of this one for $1.
Yeah, that's a professional dollar baby story. So just to round up on the King stuff, because you sort of hinted at it in the conclusion of your book. One of the surprises this year for me was Fairy Tale, because I was sure that the next book was going to be a Holly Gibney based story.
Definitely.
And is that on track as his next project, or you can't talk about
I
that?
would say so. I mean, I don't
Mhm.
know anything insider, but
Okay.
he did tweet something recently about the fact that he was doing something with Holly, which presumably were rewrites for the book. So I would
Okay.
say that it hasn't been announced yet, but my strong feeling is that that is what will be next.
Right.
The
And
only
I
other
also,
thing we know about is this novella that he talked about called Rattlesnake, which
yes.
is he describes as a Cujo sequel.
Yeah, which I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, and so my feeling is that he will probably save that up until he's got a bundle of them and do another, different seasons, four past
Right.
midnight kind of thing,
Right.
with 4 novellas.
Yeah. I also think he mentioned for the Holly story that it would have something to do, like he would take COVID into account and incorporate it into the story. Do you remember hearing that?
Yeah, he has definitely said that, and
Yeah.
he sort of worked around COVID with Billy Summers, because
Yeah.
he ended up in this situation where he had to get a couple of characters off the page, and his original manuscript, he was going to send them off on a cruise, and in 2020 or 2021 that just didn't fly, so he decided to move the book back in time to 2019
Yeah.
to avoid COVID, which also put him in the Trump years, which gave him some different material to talk about.
Right. Right. I know you're at regular correspondence with King. I'm just curious. I don't want you to go into details or anything, but like he's at one point he was always saying that people were talking to him about whatever happened to Charlie McGee and Danny Torrance, and a lot of people wanted him to put those two together, and of course that will never happen now. But I'm wondering, for me, the two characters that I really want to find out what happened to them after the current story had ended is Ben Mears and Mark Petrie. I think that there's some good tales to be told there. Where like we got the one like bringing Father Callahan. Spoilers for anybody who hasn't read the Dark Tower series. Bringing Father Callahan into the Dark Tower series was one of my favorite things. And I'm not saying he has to bring these characters in, but I would just love to know what they were doing after the events of Salem's Lot. Has that ever come up in conversation with
It
him?
hasn't. I mean, I'm trying to scratch my memory to decide if this is a real memory or not. But doesn't Father Callahan talk about Ben and Mark?
He does mention them, but I don't remember the specifics of it either. But I still like to know what happened to him.
And I think it's funny that he decided to call Charlie Reed in Fairy Tale Charlie McGee Reed. And I think the thing that strikes me about that is that we know that Charlie's father was a Stephen King reader, because there's a point later on when Charlie says a sentence that will be familiar to any Dark Tower fan, and he said, "This is something that my father told me from a book he read." So his father clearly had read the Dark Tower series, and so possibly he named his son Charlie McGee Reed because he had also read Firestarter.
Right. Yeah, because that would be a crazy matchup too, putting Charlie McGee with Ben Mears and Mark Petrie. I don't know if the timelines would work, but that would be an interesting, because I think that would make a great TV series myself. But yeah, I'm surprised nobody's pitched that to him yet.
Well, Salem's Lots, we don't know what they're doing with the movie, which is sort of shelved right now. But
disappointing.
Disappointing, because I was really looking forward to seeing what they would do, because I think that that's something that's really ripe for modern telling.
Yeah, especially in this post-COVID.
Yeah, and the 70s or 80s version, the original miniseries, at its time was really quite well done.
Yeah.
But I have a hard time going back and looking at it now, just because it is so dated and of its time.
Yeah.
And the follow-up remake, I never had much use for.
It's terrible. Not one likable character in that.
Well, I did like Samantha Mathis as Susan.
Yes.
But, so I tend to forget about that one. So, I really had high hopes, and I've heard that they were doing some reshoots. My hope is that they've decided to put it off till Halloween-ish 2023.
Yeah, that's where it has to come out. Like to dump it in April would be
wasn't
terrible.
Going to be good. So the fact that it's not on the calendar at all is a little bit worrisome. But I have some hopes for it, and maybe they've done something contemporary with it.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I know Warner Brothers is going under a big upheaval right now. They're doing some real cost-cutting things, and there's talking about them being sold to Universal or something now. So I'm hoping that part of the reason that Salem's Lot got pulled was not because it was not great, but it's just that they're reassessing everything. I mean, they canceled that Batgirl movie outright, and it was completed. So so there's big things going on there. So it's hard not to be a little jaded, especially after the experiences with the recent Firestarter remake and
the Pet Sematary remake
and Pet Sematary and Dark Tower.
And it's funny, I do this column for Dave Hinchberger for his annual calendar, and so I did the one for 2021, looking forward to 2022, and in 2021 there was a lot going on. There were a lot of streaming adaptations, and I look forward to 2022 to say, these are the things that I know that there's a director attached or there's a screenwriter attached, and we might see them. And not a single one of those things came to fruition this year.
Right.
And the only streaming show that we're going to see this year is Harrigan's Phone next month. Yeah. There's been nothing new on the streaming front at all. And I'm not quite sure what that's all about. If people sort of went mad after it and sort of blew the big budgets on things, hoping that they could capitalize on it. Hell, even the Children of the Corn movie, which was filmed and it showed like once in Florida 2 years ago. They keep saying that they're going to release it, but even that one hasn't managed to come out. For what it's worth. I don't really care about the Children of the Corn things, but people just seem to be a little bit more gun shy. I think Harrigan's Phone looks like it's going to be good.
Yeah, it's funny. I pictured Donald Sutherland when I was reading that story. So I was really happy when I saw that. That looks good. It's it's interesting how I don't know how much of an impact COVID's had on a lot of projects. Still, a lot of things get put on hold, and then it's players change, and then it's hard to get the same enthusiasm in place for those projects that were previously greenlit or had a chance of it. So it's going to be interesting to see how many King projects we're going to see in the future. But yeah, Harrigan's Phone is the only thing that's besides Salem's Lot that I'm really aware of. That's,
well, there was a writer's room at least for the Derry prequel.
Yeah.
So presumably if there was a writer's room, then there's something going with that. That there is a Boogeyman movie, which I think they filmed it over in Louisiana, so that's presumably coming along at some point. Yeah, and so I turned in my column for the 2023, and again, I've got a long list of things that have been optioned. I mean, Fairy Tale was just optioned, and you know, a week or two after the book came out, by a pretty high-profile director, the guy who does the Bourne movies. So
yeah, that didn't take too long.
It didn't take too long. Yeah.
Yeah, they like the new books, that's for sure.
And the Talisman, you know, I don't know that we're going to see it maybe within the next couple of years, but the Duffer Brothers have it, and they teased it in Stranger Things. Yeah. So I think after 40 years, Spielberg bought the rights to the Talisman before the book was published. Right. I think we're finally going to get to see it, and I think the Duffer Brothers are the guys to do it.
I agree. Unfortunately, as you said, they still have to do season 5 of Stranger Things. So that's, you know, that's probably, Talisman's probably like 5, 6, 7 years down the road.
Maybe 2 or 3 at least. Maybe 2.
Yeah. And I believe they're doing that as a series, not as a movie as well. So that's the proper format for it. Have you heard any rumblings about Dark Tower in any form, or is that just...
other than Glenn Mazzara's pilot for the Wizarding Glass thing, which they filmed, and Amazon didn't pick up? Everybody who I know who has had the opportunity to see that is deeply disappointed that it didn't get picked up. I hope one day maybe I'll get to see that as well. But
yeah, I'd love to see it too.
But there's been no rumblings. I think again, the studios are a little bit gun shy about things that aren't going to be Marvel Universe, DC Universe scale. Yeah. And the problem with the Dark Tower is and has always been, you know, they got Matthew McConaughey and Idris Elba for this movie, which meant that they were going to be bringing in people to the theater who didn't know anything about the Dark Tower series. Yep. And you've got to create a movie that's as accessible for that audience as it is for the diehard fans, and that's a difficult task.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's especially difficult when you only have a 90-minute runtime.
Well, yeah, and again, the studios kept getting gun shy, and I used to follow the news reports, and it's got this size of a budget. Oh well, it's going to move to this studio, and it's got this size of a budget. It just kept getting whittled away. Yeah, it's really difficult to jump in the middle of a story and try to explain all this backstory in 90 minutes. It was. And it's too bad, you know, because I think Idris Elba was fantastic. I think one scene that really worked for me was when he was doing the gun training sequence with the boy in Jake, and I don't know if it was a warehouse or a factory or something like that. I thought that was probably the best scene in the whole movie. I really like that. So. And the other big mistake I thought was they made the movie more about Jake than Roland. So that's, but I guess that was like they're trying to make it accessible to all ages and that. So, all right, that's all the King stuff I had. I just wanted to wrap it up then with the stuff that you're writing. As we mentioned earlier, you've got a lot of short stories out in the wild right now, and being published in so many different places that I'll just reference your website for people where they can track all this stuff down. I know that you are working on is it a follow-up novella with Brian Keane, continuing the music playlist idea? Yeah, so Dissonant Harmonies was this collaboration that Brian and I did, and we call it a collaboration. And in one sense it is, in one sense it isn't. We wrote independently, but the collaborative part of it is that we each provided a playlist of music for the other person to listen to while we wrote. And so my book, my novella is called The Dead of Winter. And we have already exchanged our playlists for Dissonant Harmonies 2. And my idea at this point, assuming it all comes together, is to do a follow-up that will be called The Dead of Night, using the same core characters that were in The Dead of Winter.
Okay, cool. And how's your playlist this time compared to the previous one?
The interesting thing Brian did for me is he gave me a playlist that's completely instrumental.
Oh.
And what's funny is I had debated about doing the same thing with him, but at the last minute I didn't do that. The playlists are out there. I think we posted them on Spotify for people who are interested. But just this past week, I did a completely reread of The Dead of Winter to pull out all the facts that I need to remember about the characters, what color of their eyes and how old are they and things like that.
Sure.
So I've got that all set up in Scrivener, which is my sort of research pad for when I'm going to work on something. The other thing that I'm sort of gearing myself up to do now that the publicity run for the new book is sort of dying down a little bit is I have 2 novels that I want to get into the hands of publishers.
Right.
One that Brian Freeman, he used to work for Cemetery Dances, now with Levidian Publications, has been a huge fan of the book. I've had the manuscript around for quite a while, and I've done a few rewrites on it. And a couple of years ago, he approached me to. He did a book many years ago called Detours, which was outtakes from published works. Chapters that got cut for various reasons. And he said, is there anything from this novel called Ghost Inn that you could pull out for a sort of a standalone thing for that? And as I was reading through the novel, I was thinking, I like this. I like that. I'm not sure I want to actually give any of this away, but I did find one of the comments my agent had said was that there were too many viewpoint characters. And so I found one character who I wanted to remove from the manuscript, but I wanted to capture her story. And so I pulled that all out. And there were bits that I had to sort of rework because I couldn't just take them out. It would leave gaping wounds. But I pulled that out and gave that to Brian. And so if he ever gets to do Detours 2, he'll have that outtake. But I liked the book so much on rereading it that I've gone through and I've made it a post-COVID novel. Which I've had to revise a couple of times because originally I thought COVID would be over this time last year. So I've had to dilate some of the timeline in it, but I'm really quite excited by it, and I hope that I can. I just got some feedback on it from Richard Chismar, and he's very enthusiastic about it too. So if everything goes well, then this could end up being my first published book.
Oh, awesome. And is this the, you said you had 2 novels. Is this the horror one that you're talking about?
This one it has horror supernatural elements to it. It's about a horror writer, and it's about something that happened to him that inspired his first book. And now all these years later, he's got to go back and face that place again that he's been avoiding for all these years at a fan convention in his honor.
Okay.
So there are Stephen King-ish elements to it. More about his life experience than about his books in particular.
Right. Yeah, I was getting Misery vibes from it. Is that off base or?
Ish. Yeah, I don't want to say too much about that because there are some things that you could think that, and maybe I'm misleading them in that way. But I really like the idea of this all taking place essentially at a fan convention,
right?
Because I've been at a number of these over the years, and I've seen all the different sorts of personality types that you get going to these things.
Right?
And just want to drop him into this. A little bit outside of his comfort zone because he's been in lockdown for a couple of years, and he's never been back to this place, even though he lives very close to it, and he sort of gazes at it from time to time. He's never gone in the doors before. Now he's back.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And so you've got those 2 going for you?
The other one's a straight crime novel.
Right.
I published at least 10 or 12 short stories featuring this detective.
Okay, cool.
And this is a novel that features one of his cases with his. He works with his brother and another guy in this Kane investigation set in Houston. So it's. I'm hoping to do for Houston what other writers have done for other geographic areas, like Michael Connolly with Los Angeles, and there's other staked out other terrain like the Florida crime novels. And
right. Oh, very cool. So is there, what are you working on right now then? Like those, because those are done, you're just sort of waiting to hear back, right?
I'm going to do one more pass through the horror one.
Okay.
I've got a couple of notes from Rich that I'm going to sort of work through. But then The Dead of Night will be my next big project.
Oh, okay.
But I'm always working on short stories. I've got a list of about 4 upcoming markets that I'm going to try to write something for. I've got a little collection of stories. There's this publisher that has done a set of anthologies that are based on the seasons.
Oh, okay.
I missed out on the first one, but I've had short stories accepted or published in their spring, summer, and winter one. No, summer, fall, and winter. I missed out on the spring one. Okay. And the winter one is going to come out, of course, on the first day of winter. And so once the rights for that one revert to me, so I'm not competing with them, I'm going to write an original story for the one that I missed. And they're fairly short stories. They're only about 2,000 to 3,000 words each. I think I'll put a bundle of the 4 of them together and self-publish them on Amazon the way I did with the Ogilvy Affair.
Right, right. As a writer, one of the things that struck me when I'm from the forward of Stephen King's On Writing book is Amy Tang mentioned that people never ask writers about the language. What does that mean for you when you're writing? What is it about the language that you try to work on when you're writing?
One of the interesting things that I really started doing when I wrote The Dead of Winter was I wrote the first draft of that longhand. I had one of these Moleskine notebooks, and I just wrote day after day, just do it longhand. And when I was finished, then of course there's the process of transcribing it.
Right.
And I discovered that the new programs that are on the computers now are actually pretty good at taking dictation.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
And so I read that into the computer. And you get into a kind of interesting rhythm with it because you have to do all of the diacritical stuff too. You have to say open quote, period, close quote, new paragraph, new line.
Right.
You follow into a rhythm with it. But when you read your material that way, you also become, at least from my experience, much more aware of the words. And as I'm reading it in, I'm editing it either as I go or in my head at least to say, that doesn't sound quite right. And sometimes I'll put a little parenthesis as I'm dictating it in. But yeah, the rewriting part is really where you go back and you look at how everything is constructed. When you're writing the first draft, it's just getting it down.
Right.
And I mean, sometimes in the earlier years, I used to go back and revise what I'd written the day before I went on. And I don't do that as much now. I just get it down and then go back because there's so much of the structure and the flow of the story that you just can't see it until it's finished.
Right.
So you go back and looking at, word by word, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. Sometimes you move entire chunks of text because you're getting ahead of yourself or you're getting behind yourself. Sometimes the paragraph that you thought made sense only makes sense if you turn it upside down. What you think is the thematic sentence at the beginning really works better at the end or somewhere in the middle. There are verbal tics that we all have that you look at when you're rewriting it, words that you use over and over again, unnecessary words. One of my favorite is that.
Yep.
I use that so much, and if I search and replace just to delete all the that's and then go back and put in the few that you need, that would probably work better.
Probably, yeah. I have that problem too.
Yeah, but just finding the right words sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm 61. And sometimes when you're writing, you grope for words,
Mm-hmm.
and you could either sidetrack yourself and go off and, run through a thesaurus or do a search or something to find the right word, or you could just stick a word in
Right.
that captures what you're trying to say. Maybe even a whole bunch of words that capture, what's that word that means blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And then so you go back then and what you go through and you look at, there's weak words and there's stronger ways of writing things. And yeah, it's all part of the process.
Right. Do you use any of the newer software like Pro Writing Aid or Grammarly or anything like that? Or
No. I use, Word
Mhm.
sort of critiques your writing as you go along and say, wouldn't it be
Right.
better if you put a comma there? Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Yeah.
The only sort of newer-ish thing that I use is Scrivener. And the nice thing about Scrivener is that it has places for you to put on the sidebar character plots and
Right.
locations and research elements, and you can attach them all to the project instead of having them just in a directory on your computer. They're in your workspace.
Right. Yeah, I use Scrivener too. Yeah, it's a good product for
And
sure.
you can expand the workspace so that you aren't tempted to go off and Google something or see what's happening on Twitter to sort of focus. Because like you said earlier on, I've only got a very narrow window every day because I have a day job for writing. And so I try not to let myself get too distracted by all the little shiny things on the internet to maximize my productivity in those hours.
Sure. Okay, well, I really appreciate your time, Bev. I hope you don't mind that we went a bit long, but
No, not at all.
it's always fun talking to you. I have one question. I maybe have asked this to you before, but I can't remember this. But how did a good Canadian kid like you end up in Texas? That's quite a leap from the East Coast.
It is. So I grew up in New Brunswick. I went to school in Northern New Brunswick. And then for most of the 1980s, I lived in Halifax, which right now is a mess because they've just gotten whopped by the Hurricane Fiona.
Yeah.
I've got some friends who live there that, there's trees down everywhere.
Right.
So I got my PhD in 1987. And I was set to go do a postdoc in Switzerland, but I couldn't do that until early 88. And my doctoral advisor was on sabbatical in College Station, and he knew this company needed somebody to fill in doing scientific work for them for a 4-month gap while they were waiting for somebody else to come in and join them permanently. So I came to Texas in 87 for that 4-month period. And then I went off to Switzerland and I lived over there for nearly 2 years doing a postdoc. And while I was over there, I met up with this company again at a conference. And I was looking for a job that would bring me back to North America. And they hired me. And so I came back to Texas in September 89, 33 years ago this month. And I've been working for them ever since. And
wow. Well, the smallest things can lead to the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, Bev, it's been a blast talking to you as always. And I wish you all the best with your future projects. And hopefully we'll get to do this again down the road sometime.
Thank you. Now I'm going to go off to Murder by the Book and sign some copies.
Awesome. Yeah. And I hope this one didn't ask too many of the repetitive questions for you.
Oh, no, not at all. This was absolutely great. It's always good to see what people are interested in. Thanks so much.
Okay. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And scene.